When the puck dropped for Game 7 of the 2011 Stanley Cup Finals, Vancouver was ready to explode. With the indomitable Canucks one win away from that long elusive first Stanley Cup, and with more than 150,000 Canucks fans packed into the streets of downtown Vancouver, that June evening had all the makings of one of the most glorious, most euphoric, and most beautiful scenes in city history. It didn't go down like that. Instead, as the Canucks limped through the biggest game in franchise history, that massive crowd descended into violence. Spurred by the Canucks' Game 7 loss, a full-on riot erupted in Vancouver, the city's second Stanley Cup riot in a 17-year span, and one of the most disgraceful moments in NHL history. Look, one of the unfortunate realities of pro sports and the incredible passion they engender is that sometimes that passion can lead to some regrettable behavior, win or lose. Hell, in the last 35 years, NHL hockey alone has produced a handful of memorable riots. In 1993, for instance, jubilant Montrealers opted to celebrate their Stanley Cup victory over the LA Kings by vandalizing stores and setting police cars on fire, leading to more than 100 arrests and upwards of $2 million in property damage. More relevant to this tale, however, is what happened the following year. In 1994, in their second ever trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, the Vancouver Canucks lost in heartbreaking fashion, dropping Game 7 by 1 goal after storming back from a 3-1 series deficit. As a result, the Canucks, who became an NHL franchise in 1970, remained championshipless. And suffice it to say, folks in Vancouver didn't take it too graciously. Following the Canucks' Game 7 defeat, devastation soon gave way to rage in downtown Vancouver. Fans started rampaging through the streets, causing more than $1 million worth of property damage and leaving hundreds injured. It got so bad that the RCMP had to be called in. The ordeal also left one man with permanent brain damage after he was shot in the head by police with a plastic bullet. Yeah, not good. But that's critical context to keep in mind as we fast forward to 2011, which happened to be exactly 40 years removed from the Canucks' inaugural NHL campaign. By that point, Vancouver's Stanley Cup drought was downright historic, but the 2010-2011 Canucks also looked uniquely capable of ending that futile stretch. Because that team was straight up incredible. Daniel and Henrik Sedin were at the height of their powers. In fact, Daniel took home the Art Ross Trophy that year with 104 points. Ryan Kesler, meanwhile, set a career high with 41 goals and took home the Selke Award as the game's best defensive forward. Christian Ehrhoff was a Norris Trophy candidate. Dan Hamhuis got a down-ballot vote for the Norris too. And veteran netminder Roberto Luongo posted the lowest goals against average of his Hall of Fame career. Ultimately, that stacked Canucks team set new franchise records for wins and points, both of which were tops in the NHL. They also led the league in both goals for and goals against. Real juggernaut stuff. Having said that, because they're the Canucks, they nearly blew it in the first round of the playoffs. They coughed up a 3-0 series lead against the Chicago Blackhawks, the same team that had eliminated them from the playoffs in each of the previous 2 seasons. Same old Canucks, right? Wrong.
Hamhuis dumped the puck back in. Campoli trying to clear it. Burrows shoots, scores!
From that point onward, the Canucks cruised. They downed Nashville in 6 games in the second round without ever trailing in the series. Then, with a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals on the line, they spanked the San Jose Sharks in 5 games, a beatdown that saw Henrik explode for 12 points. And for the 3rd time in franchise history, and the first time since '94, the Canucks were headed to the Stanley Cup Finals. And this time, for the first time ever, they were the favorites. See, in both '82 and '94, the Canucks were Cinderella stories, making it to the finals in spite of themselves. Believe it or not, the Vancouver team that got swept by the Islanders in the '82 finals had actually finished the regular season with a losing record. This time was different though. These Canucks looked unbeatable and were undeniably better than their opponent, the Boston Bruins, a 46-win team that was themselves looking to snap a decades-long Stanley Cup drought. 39 years to be exact. So either way, one fan base was getting some long-awaited catharsis. But as the series played out, it sure looked like it was going to be Vancouver. The Canucks eked out victories in each of the series' first 2 games, with Alex Burrows playing OT hero again in Game 2.
If the Canucks win a stranglehold, the Bruins would have to win 4 of the next 5, if it even went that far. And here's Burrows moving in, fakes the drive, and around behind he's chased the loose puck.
The Canucks had their stranglehold. 2 games in, their team of destiny vibes were palpable. But as the series shifted to Boston, that stranglehold loosened real quick. The Bruins demolished the Canucks 8-1 in Game 3, then pasted them 4-0 in Game 4 to even the series. Suddenly, it was a best of 3, and those familiar anxieties started creeping in Vancouver. However, back on home ice, the Canucks managed to stop the bleeding, nabbing a 1-0 victory in Game 5 thanks to a sensational 31-save effort from Luongo. And now, despite scoring a total of 6 goals through the first 5 games of the finals, the Canucks were 1 win away, closer than they'd ever been to a Stanley Cup championship. Naturally though, given how long both teams had been waiting for a title, this series had to go 7 games. That became clear almost immediately in Game 6. Less than 10 minutes in, the Bruins had a 4-goal lead, and the Canucks never got their deficit closer than 3. And that meant Game 7. Back in Vancouver. History in the making. And also a powder keg. See, throughout the playoffs, the city of Vancouver had opened up a large public viewing space downtown for fans to congregate and watch the games. Clearly, they weren't sufficiently concerned about a potential repeat of '94 should the Canucks lose. Nor were they moved by the fact that by the end of the playoffs, Boston city officials and police were actively discouraging people from congregating downtown during games. In any event, Vancouver's fan zone was a huge hit, and the first 3 rounds of the playoffs went off largely without a hitch. However, for the finals, the size of the crowds that descended on the fan zone and generally filled up the downtown core ended up being astronomical. For Game 2, more than 70,000 fans showed up, which actually forced the city to find a bigger space for their fan zone. And although the city tried to take precautions, like closing downtown liquor stores an hour before puck drop, there was no controlling the crowd that showed up for Game 7. As Vancouver police later reported, more than 150,000 people filled up the downtown core for Game 7, a figure that dwarfed their projections. The fan zone was at full capacity well before game time, and overcrowding quickly became a capital P problem. The barricades to the fan zone were breached before the game started, and soon enough, people were climbing onto roof awnings, up street lamps and telephone poles, even on top of porta potties to get a better view or even just some breathing room. And again, this was Game 7 for a team looking for its first Stanley Cup championship. Even though the nearby liquor stores had closed early, and even though alcohol wasn't allowed in the fan zone, people were drinking. Hard. Or as the police later put it, the level of intoxication and general belligerence was higher than that seen in previous games. And ultimately, as a historic Game 7 unfolded, all of those factors conspired together to wreak havoc, leading to a violent night of deja vu for the Canucks' ever-frustrated fanbase. See, things went south pretty quickly for the Canucks in Game 7. The Bruins took a 1-0 lead late in the first period, and almost immediately thereafter, the trouble started in downtown Vancouver. First, a 5-man fight broke out inside the fan zone. Meanwhile, police were summoned to remove a group of 35 youths who had assembled on the roof of a nearby budget rent-a-car building. And the evening's first acts of vandalism were going down, with food trucks among the first targets. Yeah, things were getting tense, and the game wasn't helping. In the second period, as the Canucks remained unable to get anything past eventual Conn Smythe winner Tim Thomas, the Bruins extended their lead to 2-0. And 5 minutes later, 3-0.
And the puck takes a crazy bounce, and it's a Boston bounce. Here's Bergeron, shorthanded to the net, hauled down. And it will be... No, the puck got into the net.
And outside Rogers Arena, shit started getting really real. Though the game wasn't over, the vibe had shifted from festive to something more sinister. That group that had climbed onto the roof of the rent-a-car building started throwing bottles. Garbage cans inside the fan zone were suddenly on fire. And elsewhere in the downtown core, a melee broke out involving 30 to 40 people. Then another big Donnybrook erupted. As the third period got underway, Vancouver was suddenly on the verge of a full-on riot. And by the time Boston added an empty net goal to put Game 7 on ice and denied the Canucks their first ever Stanley Cup title, police and security had lost control of the situation on the street. That's when the looting started, with the Gucci store among the first businesses hit. Cars started getting flipped over, and some of them set on fire. That includes police cars. Fights were breaking out everywhere too, and all manner of property damage was going down. It was ugly. In fact, the devastated Canucks were asked to stay inside Rogers Arena until the rioting subsided. Except as darkness descended over Vancouver, things only intensified.
I don't support anything that's going on right now. This place is fucked.
Eventually, to get the overwhelmingly hostile masses under control, the Vancouver police mobilized the crowd control unit, brought in the dog squad, and just like in '94, the RCMP were called in. They used tear gas, pepper spray, smoke bombs, flashbangs, whatever they could to defuse the mob. Meanwhile, with the rampage causing countless injuries, 2 major Vancouver hospitals went into Code Orange, hospital code for an influx of mass casualties. Finally, around midnight, almost 5 hours after the game ended and following hundreds of arrests, the last of the rioting stopped. But not before leaving a massive stain on Vancouver's reputation. According to the British Columbia Prosecution Service, the riot resulted in 112 businesses being damaged, 122 vehicles damaged or destroyed, and 52 assaults reported against civilians, police, and emergency personnel. All told, the rampage led to 912 criminal charges being laid against 300 alleged rioters. Those charges included 160 counts of breaking and entering, 43 counts of assault, and 18 counts of arson. Meanwhile, the riot also resulted in a monetary loss of almost $4 million, with Hudson's Bay and London Drugs among the hardest hit businesses. For his part, Vancouver's then mayor denounced the hooligans responsible for the riot, calling it shameful and disgraceful, and adding that it in no way represents the city of Vancouver. But while that may indeed be true, that it was simply a few bad apples who turned the evening violent, that night of destruction is nevertheless a defining moment for the Canucks and their fanbase. To this day, it looms large in the mind of city officials. Coming into the 2024 playoffs, 13 years later, Vancouver's mayor was reticent about opening up a public viewing space for Canucks games. But a riot, let alone a second riot, will do that. And nothing that the Canucks do or the city of Vancouver does in the future will ever fully erase the stain of that ugly June evening in 2011. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button.